I'm only standing up to say thank you to Mary and to say it's been some time since I was here talking about my journey, but the one thing I think we all have in common is we've been on that journey, and we're still, in a sense, on that journey. I was thinking today, gosh, I met some friends I first met only in Ypres in 2009 when I went on a First World War battlefield tour, because I'm sure, like many of you, I felt I owed it to that generation to go and see the battlefield. So I went and I stayed in Ypres and met two lovely Belgians, and they came over today, and we've had lunch at a place called the Roe Deer, yes, Lawnswood, and it was in 2009, in May, and when we came back, 4 weeks later, I was having a biopsy, and the news broke. My consultant was incredibly surprised. The GP had said, no, with the PSA of 5.7, you don't need to go and do anything at your age. Well, I was in my late 60s. But my wife, my lovely wife, said, I insist. So she took me to the consultant, Chen, Mr. Chen, some of you will know him. And Mr. Chen said, you don't need a biopsy at your age. 5.7? That's ridiculous. And anyway, biopsies are invasive. All right, but my wife said, he needs one. Woman's intuition. And we had one, and then the story goes, because I've told it to you before, we go along, and he says, I've just had a fax. Back to those days when he had a fax. And he said, oh God, you've got 25% prostate cancer in each, Gleason 7, oh dear. And I remember saying at that moment, well, hang on, that's prostate cancer. Yes, how many survive? I mean, what's my prognosis? And he said, 80% of the people who see me live for 5 years, leaving the unspoken question of what about the other 20%? And the shock was such that we left, and Ali, my lovely wife, said, I think we need a drink. This was in Droitwich. And we went to a pub called the Old Cock Inn. And I really thought that was very appropriate for that particular evening. And I was reminded of, as I say, meeting the people from Ypres, the lovely people from Ypres, for lunch today, all those years ago. Lovely to be here, lovely to see you all, but it's not my show tonight, it's my very good friend, Nick Owen, who is, as far as I know, got a decent prostate. One or two other things wrong, but the prostate's fine. Nick, oh God. Let me just explain how I know Nick. I joined ATV in December 1972. You remember ATV, presumably. Nick, when did you join ATV?
I joined in November 78, which is when I first met you. So I'm just a boy.
Well, Tuna, I could have sworn I've known you all my broadcasting days. But no, you joined in 1978. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you worked with the famous Billy Wright and There's Only One Gary Newbon.
Yeah, thank God. Yeah, Billy Wright I owe so much to, because many of you remember he was a sort of absolute top English footballer, captained England 90 times, played 105 times for his country, and played for Wolves for 20 years. I don't think he was ever booked. And after football, he became a manager, which didn't really work out. Then he was invited to join ATV's sports department at the Head as a great ambassador for the game, a great ambassador for the department, the sports department. And he invited me from local radio, which is where I was. And we would have known each other when I was on local radio, probably, to come along and become a sports reporter. And have a go at television, which was a gamble for me at the time because I was very well settled in radio. I saw myself going down to London to work for network radio for the BBC. So it was a gamble, 6-month contract, but it sort of worked out, and 44 years later I'm still doing it. But Billy Wright, he was a great guy to work for, absolute hero, of course, and I'm a football fanatic. And every time I drive past Molineux now and there's a statue of him outside the ground, I always salute it. And if I'm actually on foot, I always touch him.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I owe him so much.
We'll come back to Billy, I'm quite sure. But how everyone here has dreamt at one stage or another being a great sportsman, or if not a sportsman, being a sports reporter and being able to go to Lords or Molineux or Wembley or dare I say, no, I daren't say Worcester Warriors. I'm going to talk to you about that in just a moment. But you were at Shrewsbury School. At school, did something happen when you said, right, I want to be a sports reporter, or I want to be a journalist?
Not really, although I know with hindsight now that I was very interested in the news, and it was I was likely to do it because even when I was younger and I was at prep school, at the age of 11 or 12, I created a newspaper which I used to write out longhand and print it on an old-fashioned printer and hand it round. Yeah. And I created a table tennis tournament so I could cover it. So I was really into that sort of thing, right. But never thought until I was at university that I really wanted to go into journalism. It didn't cross my mind. And it suddenly dawned on me in my last year at university when I was still wondering what I was going to do. I thought, why don't I have a go at journalism? So I applied all over the shop and ended up with the Yorkshire newspaper group, because I was at Leeds University, so it was, one of the places I applied to. And that set me on my way, 2.5 years as a trainee up north. And then I got a job on the Birmingham Post, which brought me to the Midlands for the first time. And it was, of course, a daily paper then, a broadsheet with a decent circulation. And it was very exciting to come to the big city and work on the Birmingham Post. So, I realise now that I was always destined to do this job, or destined to be in journalism of some sort. So I didn't know when I was younger.
But then it was radio next, was it?
Yes, I did radio for 5 years at Pebble Mill, at the very earliest days of local radio, before commercial radio had come along. You do everything in those days. You did everything in those days, whether you're producing or reporting or presenting, reading the news and so on. And we used to edit tapes with razor blades and stuff like that. And then you'd lose a bit and you'd be picking things up off the floor and playing them back to say, oh, that was the bit I meant to keep. It was really hand-to-mouth stuff, but a great experience. And I was a newsman then, although I loved sport, but I was asked to help out with the sport occasionally, and I ended up as the sports editor and presenting 5 hours every Saturday afternoon. And that was invaluable, with hindsight again, invaluable training for doing things like breakfast television, which was 3.5 hours long, and being able to ad lib and move from this subject to that subject, interview this person, that person, and so on. Here's
something that you perhaps don't know about me. When I was at university, I had decided that I wanted to be John Arlott. Now,
a legend.
You will know, everyone here will know who John Arlott was. Indeed, I'm slightly older than Nick, quite a lot older than Nick, really. But when John Arlott did the preview of the county cricket season, and indeed the test season, perhaps in late March, you could smell the new mown grass somehow in that
absolutely
wonderful
voice, so evocative.
And I actually got a job with BBC Home Service, South and West, on their sports page, which was the opt-out home service programme after the 5 o'clock. What was the 5 o'clock one?
PM?
On a Saturday.
You don't mean the Archers? You mean
No.
I always thought you should have been in the Archers, to be honest.
Yes. And eventually they gave me a job to do. It was in 1965, and the South Africans were touring in the summer. As it happened, of course, it turned out to be the last time that they toured, but a contract dropped through my letterbox in that summer saying, report as number 2 commentator to Charles Fortune. Now, Charles Fortune was an expat Englishman who was to the South African cricketing community as John Arlott was to us. So I reported to the county ground Bristol, full of enthusiasm. But this is it. Number 2 commentator. Oh, John Arlott sort of start to move over. And I met Charles, and he was enormously charming. He had a pile of Rothmans cigarettes. Rothmans was sponsoring the South African side. And he said, "Okay, Peter, what I want you to do is just keep the bowler's analysis. I'll do the commentary. We're doing an hour before lunch, an hour before tea, and an hour at close of play, direct live to South Africa." So I put the headphones on, and he spoke to Flossie. "Hello, Flossie." South Africa, as clear as anything, coming down the headphones. And sure enough, I thought, okay, that's it. But anyway, it's at least some experience working with a seasoned commentator. And as the players walked off the field at 1:30 at the county ground, I suddenly heard him say, "And with me today is a young broadcaster by the name of Peter Tomlinson, who would like to give you a lunchtime summary. Peter, the next 5 minutes is all yours."
No,
yeah,
that's horrendous.
Seriously, and he'd been put up to that by a man called Tony Smith, who was the sports producer at Home Service in White Ladies Road. Anyway, I staggered through that, and I did the same at the end of play. And that was my first ever broadcast. And then during my last year at university, I covered football matches, and you go back and on the Saturday evening give a 1-minute report. So I was at Oxford, so if Swindon were at home, I'd drive down, and I did that. And it was 1966, which you will remember in soccer terms, was really rather famous. And I got a phone call from the Light programme, head of sport, I forget his name, saying, "Peter, we've got a job for you. We're looking for new guys because it's the World Cup, and we'd like you to come." Oh, tremendous. "When would you like me?" "Next week." I said, "But I've got my finals in 6 weeks' time." He said, "We don't care about that. You either join us in a week's time or not." Well, what could you do if you'd been at university for all those years? I turned the job down and took my finals, and I never ever got a job as a sports reporter again. So that's you didn't know that story, did you? No, 1966.
No, I didn't.
So I never became John Arlott, and I would love to have become.
Well, nor did I.
So there you are. The sport you really loved was soccer.
Well, and cricket. No,
and cricket?
Equal. Oh, yeah, equal. Absolutely passionate.
Who did you support as a cricketer?
Well, this may surprise you, but I've got a huge family background in Derbyshire. So I support Derbyshire. I was president of Derbyshire and everything in my time.
Really?
And I presented their end-of-season awards only a few weeks ago. So I've been very involved with them for a long, long time. And some of my closest friends are ex-Derbyshire players. Mm-hmm. So I go there as often as I can. It's a bit of a haul from Kinver, where I live.
Yeah.
It's easier going to New Road, which I also do as often as I can.
Yeah.
But yeah, cricket and football. But in the early days of sports reporting, especially on television, football dominated on independent television, as you know.
Yeah.
And it was a real battle to get any sort of coverage of Warwickshire or Worcestershire or Derbyshire or Leicestershire, who were all in the area of ATV. But so sport became my thing, and I've been lucky that I've done loads of different things. I anchored the World Cup in 1990 for ITV.
Yep.
I anchored the Olympic Games in '88 for ITV. Commentated on the World Cup in 1982. And reported at various championships over the years. So I've had some great times in sport, but I have to say, whenever I do sport, I do miss the wider world. And so when, for instance, after TVAM, breakfast television, I went into ITV Sport as the main man, I missed interviewing showbiz personalities, politicians, people with human stories. It can be quite sterile interviewing football managers and so on. You know, especially in those days, they didn't give as much of themselves then as they do now. And even so, it's quite hard now getting blood out of a stone, from what I'm seeing, you know, when you watch them. You've got
to be fluent in Portuguese.
If you support Wolves, my goodness. You've got to be fluent in lots of different languages, really, if you want to get it, you know, really under their skin, haven't you? But I'm not involved in sport at all, really, now, except as a fan.
Well, because we do share a great interest in sport, and I know that many of you do. And Okay, we'll talk about TVAM in a moment. What is going on in the rugby world? We've lost Worcester Warriors. We've now lost Wasps. What is? I hate to say it in case I am committing libel, but in terms of Worcester Warriors, I think the owners have quite a lot to do with the demise of that club, don't they?
I feel so sad for Cecil Duckworth's family. Cecil Duckworth, who, is such a fantastic benefactor for Worcester and the county as a whole. He must be turning in his grave. I'm so sad about it. He was such a lovely man. I presume you knew Cecil pretty well. He did so much to create Worcester Warriors into a Premiership setup, and everything was such, high quality. From what I hear, someone has made a massive cock-up somewhere along the line. But I couldn't go into any more detail on that because I don't really know. But obviously, money has been overspent. And it's the same with Wasps.
Yeah.
I understood that they were spending £40,000 a month just to service their debt at Wasps. It's breathtaking, isn't it? And they don't get the figures, numbers, watching their games that Premier League football clubs do. And so I don't know how they sustain themselves. They rely on benefactors and bond schemes and things like that, which they can't pay back. This is the trouble. So it's very, very sad that the two major rugby clubs in our neck of the woods are both at this moment out of action. It's really sad.
And I don't think we've heard the last of it. I've got a question here. Whilst we're on the subject of soccer, Dave Sidebottom, are you still involved with Luton Town? And have Luton ever played the Harriers, Kidderminster Harriers?
Yeah, they have many times. Who's that from, sorry?
From Dave Sidebottom.
Hello, Dave. Where are you, Dave?
City Patome or whatever.
Dave. Hello, Dave. Yes, because Luton have had a real, to use a cliche, roller coaster existence. We were one of the founder members of the Premier League, and 8 years ago we were playing in the conference. We weren't even in the Football League at all. So, and when we were in the conference, we played Kidderminster a number of times. I think we scored 7 against them one time at Luton, but had some wonderful games at Agborough. I loved going there. It's very local to Kinver for me, whereas going to a home game at Luton nowadays where I live, 2.5 hours each way. It's absolute killer. I still do it. I went last Saturday and so on, but it is quite a journey. I just love the whole atmosphere about Kidderminster Harriers, a lovely club. But yeah, Luton were founder members of the Premier League but got relegated. In recent years, they had 3 administrations in 10 years, ended up being docked 40 points in 6 months, 30 points at the start of one season, and that pushed them down out of the Football League into the conference where they were for 5 years. And I was chairman all that time, and it's pretty tough going, I tell you. But I still enjoyed being in the conference, getting around to clubs like Kidderminster and all around the country. Real grassroots stuff where the people who are involved with these clubs are absolutely there for one reason unknown: passion for their community and their club and love of the game. And it was a really good experience. But now, amazingly, we're back in the Championship. And tonight we're playing at Norwich City, who've just come down from the Premier League. Yet, 8 or 9 years ago, we were playing Ebbsfleet and Hayes and Yedding. It's amazing how we've come back. I'm very proud of it.
Keith Crown would like to know, are you still a director of Luton? Keith? Where's Keith? Right.
Hello, Keith.
He's still a director?
No, I'm a vice president now. I stepped down from the chair about 4 or 5 years ago, just because we were rising up the league and it needed a full-time chairman, really, and a businessman as well. I was never in it as a businessman. I was never in it financially at all. I was purely a figurehead. When things were really bad, they had formed a new consortium to try and buy the club out of administration and save the day, because it could have gone out of business. And they just wanted a figurehead for the consortium. And because I was quite well known around Luton, the Luton area, they asked me to be that figurehead, the chairman, which was a fantastic privilege. I had to get special permission from the BBC to be allowed to do it. And I like to think I did a good job in the sense that I raised the profile of the club, and there were loads of articles done about Luton Town, which perhaps might not have been done if the chairman hadn't been sort of well known. Well, I'm the vice president now, anyway.
Paul Dakin says, well, a couple of questions here, but whilst we're on the Luton Town saga, why did you and do you support Luton Town? What's your link with Luton?
Well, I was born 12 miles away and grew up in a town called Berkhamsted. You've probably never heard of it, in Hertfordshire. That's where I was born and grew up. And my father used to go there when I started getting into football. he took me. My first ever game was September the 3rd, 1958. We drew 1-1 with Leeds United. Alan Brown scored our goal from a left-wing cross by Jimmy Adam. Not that I can remember it in every detail, but I still remember the excitement of walking into a football ground for the first time, a proper football ground, as opposed to, jumpers for goalpost type football. And seeing how green the grass was and goals with nets on and all that. Oh, it's just a wonderful thing. And I still absolutely love that rickety old ground, which used to hold up to 30,000 and now only holds 10 because of sort of safety measures and things like that, rightly so. So it's a really rickety little old ground, and how we managed to hold our own and get into the playoffs for the Premier League last year, it's amazing, absolutely amazing.
Why, still on the subject of sport, I'm going to get on to Anne Diamond, a number of questions there about TVAM, Anne Diamond and Nick. Why is it that the West Midlands have never produced consistently high-standard soccer clubs in the last few years?
What's that got to do with Anne Diamond?
Not a lot.
No.
But as far as I'm concerned, it's much more interesting.
I hope anyone who's not interested in sport isn't completely bored.
Why?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Aston Villa won the European Cup, didn't they? And they won the league in the early 80s. And Nottingham Forest is East
40 years ago, you know that.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. East Midlands have done rather better, haven't they?
But, in the 50s, Wolves were the biggest side in the land, as you know, and they were absolutely unbeatable. It's happened over the years, but I don't particularly know why they haven't been up there like, the Liverpools, your Manchesters and the various London clubs. I don't really understand it, except that the big money gets attracted to the glamorous conurbations, I would say. And Manchester United and Manchester City, Manchester's got so much more glitz about it than Birmingham. And in fact, Wolverhampton. Don't you agree? And I can't understand it, but it's true. And many people regard Manchester as a second city, don't they? Which is really annoying. I mean, I'm an adopted Brummie, and I love Birmingham, and I love the West Midlands. I love Kidderminster. I love Worcestershire as a county, and so on. It really annoys me that people don't recognise how much has come out of this part of the world. For instance, this is a complete change of tack. Music. People talk about Liverpool Sound and the Mersey Beat, which was great, absolutely fantastic. But look at the stuff that's come out of Birmingham and the wider West Midlands, going back to the 60s. People like Spencer Davis, the Moody Blues, Black Sabbath, Move, and later on the likes of UB40 and
Led Zeppelin.
Led Zeppelin, yeah, another from the 60s,
Yeah.
Massive amount of groups, and many more you can't think of off the top of your head. Duran, and so on. I think there is going to be a museum soon. I'm biased because I'm very close. ELO is another. I'm very close friends with a couple of guys, one from Black Sabbath and one from ELO. And a couple from Move, actually. So, I'm very biased about this. But the music that's come out of this neck of the woods is phenomenal. It really is. Robert Plant had quite a connection with around here, didn't he, with Kiddie? And he still lives just outside Kinver.
Yep.
And it's just somehow... And Slade is another big band. Might not be your cup of tea, but my goodness, they were so successful, massively successful. The Midlands just doesn't seem to get recognised, and it really annoys me.
Yes, we could spend a long time talking about that. Certainly from my point of view.
You're a musician yourself.
The West, gosh, well, you might call me that. In fact, the last time I was in Kidderminster Town Hall, I was actually on stage playing in a band.
Were you?
In a jazz band? Yeah, I was. That was in March 2020. Yep, and it was the Mayor's Ball, and we got invited to do that. So, okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say I used to play the trombone, but I let it slide. Anyway, carry on.
We've covered a bit about sport, and Luton Town was obviously going to crop up. And you've told us a bit about, broadcasting. So there you are. You're a sports reporter for ATV. Good old ATV, by the way, because I don't think commercial television, shall we call it that, has got any better since those days. I mean, you must look back on those days.
Oh, they were wonderful, weren't they?
Well,
they had
got
such
away with
personality, these stations, which they don't have now.
Yeah,
and a lot of the personality is down to people like you, of course, in-vision continuity announcer.
Yes.
I'm sure you remember Peter, linking the programme. That was Coronation Street. Now here comes World in Action type thing. But we'd see him, or it's Stuart White, or Kevin Morrison, people like that, weren't they? In-vision continuity. They were the face of television stations all around the country, and each region had their own face. And that's all gone. It's now out of vision and characterless and not very good either. I think some continuity is outrageously bad, don't you? Shocking. I really do. But anyway, that's another story.
Well, so you're there.
And also, I'm just going to say, ATV today used to get 3 million people. 3 million people, 6:30 to 7, weekday nights. Well, that would be unthinkable now. I mean, they get about 400,000 and we get about 500,000.
You still beat them?
Yes, mostly. But of course, they've got a great legacy because they come on at 6 o'clock having just followed The Chase. And The Chase gets something like 3 times bigger audience than Pointless. So the pickup point for BBC News at 6 o'clock is not as good as it is for Central News, or whatever it's called now, at 6 o'clock. And that is very relevant, as you well know.
I have to confess that over the last 2 years, I think since COVID happened, I have watched less and less news. I began to get fed up with all those press conferences during COVID. I got fed up with the reporters trying to trip up both the experts from the NHS and the Prime Minister and so on. I really began to lose my faith in reporting and reportage, which naturally leads us on to you moving from the sports reporting world into the big world of breakfast television, at the beginning of breakfast television.
Yeah,
how did that happen?
Yeah, well, I was working at ATV had become Central, as you know, morphed into Central TV, and I was working there, and there's lots of detail, about how I wasn't very happy. Along came an approach from TVAM, which was due to go on air in about 6 weeks' time, saying they hadn't got a sports presenter yet. They'd got one lined up, but he was demanding a phenomenal amount of money, and so they couldn't do it. And so they approached me, because they knew I was a cheapskate.
Right.
You're not meant to agree. And so it was a big gamble, but I took it. And so off I went to Camden Lock in North London at the beginning of January 1983, and we went on air on February the 1st, 1983. And I was a sports presenter. I was on air on the very first day of ITV's breakfast television, which is something I'm really proud of, because that can't be taken away, a sort of pioneer, I feel. But the most astonishing thing was that it had a terrible time in the early stages. No one was interested in breakfast television, really. No one had a television in their bedroom or in their kitchen. They were only in the living room. And most people were getting up in the morning, rushing through the kitchen and off to work, didn't go near the living room, didn't see the telly, didn't think of switching it on. So it took a long time for a culture change to occur, for people to start watching. TVAM, because it was commercial, desperately needed audiences, people watching, to be able to get decent rates in for the adverts, and people weren't watching much. So they decided to change everything. I mean, this was the famous 5 who started it, if you remember. David Frost, Michael Parkinson, Anna Ford, Angela Rippon, and the great current affairs commentator Robert Key, who's no longer with us, as is David Frost no longer with us. And they decided to change it, the management. And amazingly, after 8 weeks, they asked me if I'd take over. So I was only known as a sports presenter a sports reporter presenter from the Midlands. Suddenly I was asked to take over a national television station as the main presenter, 3.5 hours live every day. And it was a hell of a challenge, to be honest, but a great thrill. So I replaced David Frost, and I presented with Anna Ford and Angela Rippon. They then got sacked. I mean, it was such a dramatic time. Do you remember all that in the headlines? I mean, because it was a station founded by such big names, it was headlines around the world, not just in England. And then I worked with Linda Berry, who you might remember from ATV days. She presented for a while, and she got moved aside. And the management said to me, "Who in a perfect world would you like to present with?" And I said, Anne Diamond. And they said, who's Anne Diamond? I said, well, we were co-presenters and great friends in the Midlands in our dream to do a national programme together. So the new man in charge by this stage, because people were being sacked all over the shop, Peter Jay went and so on. Greg Dyke was the new man in charge. He said, can I meet Anne Diamond? I said, yeah. And they met in a pub that very night, and 6 weeks later, she was sitting next to me. And Greg Dyke brought in other new ideas. He had a weather lady, which was unusual in those days. Wincy Willis came in as a personality weather presenter. He introduced people like Gordon Honeycomb, well-known newsreader, to give it gravitas. Mad Lizzie, who was doing the exercises. Paul Gambaccini, Giles Brandreth, Jimmy Greaves, Chris Tarrant, all these names, some of whom were great buddies anyway. And it created a wonderful family, jocular atmosphere. We did serious stuff as well, obviously, but it created a wonderful atmosphere, and in no time we overtook the BBC, which had Frank Both and Selina Scott, and by the end of the year we were absolutely rocking away with the ratings. It was a fantastic time. Diana Dawes is another who became a regular and became a great friend. I could tell you many stories about Diana Dawes. It was a wonderful time, and I really loved it. The only drawback was the hours, to be honest. Serious. My alarm went off. By this time I'd moved back down south to Berkhamsted, my hometown. My alarm was going off at 2 minutes to 3 every morning. And, I was at my desk by 3:45. And that is not very civilised. After 4 years, I really felt, whoa.
So, hang on, 1983... starts in a sort of blaze of publicity, all these big names, they all fall down very, very quickly, becomes a sort of national laughing stock in a way. BBC were laughing all the way, saying, look, they can't get it right.
Comedians made gags about them, things like London Palladium and stuff.
Yeah.
I can still remember Jimmy Tarbuck cracking a gag. I can't remember what it was, but it was very, very hurtful.
Really?
It's your career, your livelihood.
Yeah.
I've got 2 kids, and I've got 4 now, but then 2 kids, and it was my job. I was earning a living, and it could have gone bust any time. And what saved us was the company that made Roland Rat merchandise. They paid up front for advertising for the next 6 months, $250,000 or something like that, which was a huge amount of money, because we were losing $1.5 million a week in the early days. And that upfront money really helped pay the wages for a short time, because we were beginning to make inroads, and it kept us going, and Roland Rat was another great ingredient. Greg spotted the promise of Roland Rat, could see that there was a real chance that Roland Rat could create something. And Roland Rat started before Greg came, actually, just briefly at weekends. Greg thought, this is great, this rat, really irreverent rat. And so he came on every day when there were school holidays on, every day, holidays, half-term, and weekends, and became a real cult. And was a great part of that station being so successful. And it became financially the most successful television station in the world.
Really?
Yeah, really? Within about a year. It was amazing, and it was just brilliant.
How long were you on?
Best part of 4 years,
right.
And then I got offered a job that was difficult to turn down, to go to ITV Sport, back into ITV Sport, as the main man and replace Brian Moore. And so, it was very tempting, because, it was tempting in itself, but also I'd be working slightly more civilised hours. And in the end, I decided to take it, but it was a big wrench, and I really missed TVAM for a long time. Missed working with Anne, because I absolutely adored Anne, and we were so close. And we did, of course, work together again a decade later on Good Morning with Anne and Nick. So I went off to ITV Sport, and I was then doing a programme every Wednesday night called Midweek Sports Special. And in amongst it all, I was doing athletics and hosting, as I said earlier, the Olympic Games and the World Cups and things like that. And Wish You Were Here came out of the same building, so I did lots of Wish You Were Heres, or Wish You Were Queer, as it was called in the business. And one little highlight, which I can hardly remember now, but at the time it was quite something, I was asked to be a judge on Miss World. Really? So I was a judge on Miss World in 1986 at the Royal Albert Hall.
So during your 4 years, you will have met and interviewed a whole host of personalities, whether they were showbiz stars, whether they were politicians, what have you. What are those names? What are those that people that really stand out in your memory when you look back? You mentioned Diana Dawes, but okay, she was working with you. But who were the people you interviewed and you think that was memorable?
Well, my favourite interview of all time is Eric Morecambe. I mean, he is my absolute hero. He was also a director of Luton Town Football Club, so there's the added spice about that. But I absolutely love Eric Morecambe, and I've got some wonderful memories of him. He joined us for about 2 hours one morning. And, you know, it was a programme where you'd interview someone and they'd stick around and we'd go on to another item, a news story, this and that, then come back to the guest. So we had him for the best part of 2 hours on the sofa. And he was just absolutely delightful. This was April 1984. And I interviewed him that day with John Stapleton. Anne was off. And, you know, we'd played a game the night before Luton had at West Ham, and I'd been to it. And I knew Eric hadn't been. So I brought him a programme, and I handed him on air, you know, on the programme, I brought a programme because I know you couldn't get it. He said, oh, thanks, I'll treasure that. Threw it over his shoulder, landed on top of a rubber plant or something. And one stage, I remember John or I said to him, we're having a lovely time with you. Can you stay here for a little while longer? He said, stay, I could marry you. Yeah. And how many children have you got? He said 3, but I left home very early this morning, so I can't be certain. He was coming out with these sort of lines all the time. But he talked about his health, because as you may well remember, he had terrible heart trouble. Yep. And he had a bypass operation in the 70s, which I think medically was pretty unusual then, pioneering stuff. And he looked really healthy, and people were ringing in with messages saying, can you advise us? My husband may or may not have a heart operation, a bypass, should we do it, and all that, because people were not anxious about it. And he was saying, well, look, I feel great, and, you know, I'm so grateful it happened to me, so do go ahead with it. And, you know, 40 days later, he was dead. I mean, it just gives me such mixed, poignant feelings about it. And I think I did the last ever television interview with him.
And it was Tewkesbury.
Tewkesbury, yeah. That's
just
right.
down the road.
The Roses Theatre.
At the Roses Theatre.
Indeed, yeah.
Yes, yes.
So, you know, fit as he was, and do you know, he's only 58. I mean, at the time, seemed quite old to me because I was so much younger, but now, 58. Yeah. Diana Dawes was 52. Richard Dimbleby, remember him? He was 52.
Yes.
He seemed like a really old man to me as a youngster growing up, watching him on telly. 52. I mean... terrible. And these people would have survived now. I don't think there's any doubt.
Well, I was thinking I do a couple of hours each week on a radio station called Serenade Radio, and it's all Frank Sinatra, Doris Day, Tony Bennett, Ella Fitzgerald, all that stuff. And one of the great singers of the middle late 50s, early 60s was a guy called Bobby Darin. Bobby Darin died 37.
Very young, wasn't he? Yeah.
He'd had rheumatic fever in his youth, like my dad, and rheumatic fever can leave your heart weak. And he'd had a replacement heart valve, and he was having a second one, and he died in the operation. Great talents sort of died far too young. Apart from Eric, and Eric...
Can I just tell you one Eric story, my favourite Eric story?
Tell me.
One day when Eric was a director of Luton Town, we were playing Watford, which is always the big needle game, local derby. And after the game, as the players were leaving the pitch, someone threw a coin onto the pitch, and it hit the referee. The referee was a very good friend of mine, Jack Taylor. Do you remember Jack Taylor? He refereed the World Cup final in '74, and he came from Wolverhampton. And I got to know Jack very well. He told me this story himself. The coin hit him in the face and cut his cheek. And anyway, everyone went off, the players, the referee, the officials. And about an hour after the game had finished, Eric dropped down from the boardroom to the referee's changing room and went in and said, "Hello, Jack, are you okay?" And Jack said, "Yeah, I'm a bit shaken up, to be honest, Eric. I've got 3 or 4 stitches in my face and it's a bit sore. I'm just sort of gathering myself before driving home to Wolverhampton." And Eric said, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And are you going to report us to the FA?" And Jack said, "No, don't worry, I won't report you." And Eric said, "Oh, thanks. Can I have my penny back?" And honestly, that is said to be a true story, which Jack Taylor himself told me.
I was playing cricket for the Lord's Taverners in 1978 when Eric was the president of the Lord's Taverners. We were playing at RAF Cranwell, and we were playing the full RAF side. It was the second or third time I'd played. I'd had a problem with my back, but I came on to bowl first change, And as the story goes, it moved a bit in the air and off the pitch, and the guy played forward and missed. At that particular moment, my disc went, and it was a slipped disc, well and truly, and the pain was agonizing. I fell down in the middle of the pitch, and the players wandered up, as they do. Come on, Tomo, what are you doing? What are you messing about? Get up. Oh, the skipper was John Alderton, the actor, and he said, "What's the matter?" And there was a bloke playing for us, a Yorkshireman, you may have heard of him, called F.S. Truman. And Fred stuck his head out. He said, "What's up, lad?" And I said, "Fred, could you take my left leg off my right leg?" I was paralyzed. I had no use in my legs at all. It was excruciatingly painful, but it was also frightening. And the moment I said that to Fred, he said, "Right, don't touch bugger. Don't touch bugger. Get some..." So the St. John ambulance came on. It's a whole long story, which I won't bother you with, but eventually I was taken in an ambulance to the RAF hospital at Cranwell. In those days, Cranwell was the training school for pilots. It isn't now, but was then. And they had 14 beds in one of the wards, all fitted up with traction equipment. The Red Arrows were performing that day at their old school, and apparently if you eject from a fighter aircraft, it tends to compress the spine, and the sooner you can get onto a traction bed, the better. So they put me on the traction bed, face down, filled me with morphine of various types. At least I think so. The next thing I knew, there was Fred Rumsey sitting on my left-hand side and Eric Morecambe on my right-hand side, with Eric saying, "What's up, sunshine?" And he made me laugh for 5 minutes, and I couldn't stand it because of the pain. And I said, "Eric, go away. Go away." "Why?" "So you're making me laugh and it hurts." And he did. He went away, and remember talking to his daughter years after when they had that show, Morecambe, and a one-man show, and I spoke to her and told her that the story, and she said, "That's about the only time I know ever anyone telling my father to go away because he was making them laugh." So I have that distinction with Eric, who was a great character. Apart from Eric, come on, you will have interviewed all kinds of interesting people.
Yeah, I've been lucky. I've done 7 prime ministers.
7?
Yeah, going back to Harold Wilson, past and present.
Half the number that the Queen has interviewed or something.
And so they were all sort of interesting in their own different ways. My favourite's John Major because he loved cricket.
Yeah,
so
of course,
he just talked cricket all the time.
Yes.
But David Cameron, I got on quite well with him as well. I liked him. But over the years, I interviewed Margaret Thatcher a couple of times. Always a bit terrifying. But I also interviewed people like Enoch Powell, and he was intellectually terrifying, I have to say.
Absolutely. The youngest brigadier in the British Army in the Second World War. And he was something like 23 or 24 years old when he was made a brigadier. An amazing an amazing intellect. In terms of showbiz characters, did you interview any of the big American stars?
Well, I interviewed Bob Hope in his back garden in Hollywood, which is quite something.
Did you?
Yeah. And I interviewed Jane Fonda on the same day as well. And she was someone I sort of worshipped as a teenager. I remember actually, it was arranged I was going to interview her at one of the Hollywood studios, and I was given a room, a very basic sort of room to change in, to sort of smarten up. And I realised there was activity in the next one, the other side of the very thin wall, and I worked out it was Jane getting changed as well. I thought, bloody hell, Jane Fonda, those pictures I had on the wall when I was a teenager and stuff. And then I realised there was a little hole in the wall. And I'd lusted after this woman as a teenager. There was a hole. What do I do about it?
Yes.
Do I cover it up? I thought, no, let her look.
Yes. You didn't.
But genuinely, I did interview her, and she was it was fantastic. And Bob Hope in his back garden with his golf course right there, and his wife bringing cups of tea out to us and things. With Anne, this was.
Did he have cue cards for the
Not
interview?
for the interview, no.
I know.
But I mean, other Americans, I mean, people like Arnold Schwarzenegger I interviewed a couple of times. He threatened to walk out because he reckoned I was being rude. We had a commercial break and I went to the loo and he told Anne he was going to walk out because he thought I was rude. I don't know why. It was quite early in his career and he was more of a bodybuilder than an actor, I think, probably.
Yes.
He probably felt I was taking the mickey a bit. I don't know. I can't remember at all. But she persuaded him to stay.
Yes.
When he left, he said, I won't be back.
Really?
No, not really. But the biggest sort of stars I've interviewed in showbiz have been more British, the Elton Johns and Tom Joneses as well. Great to get to know these sort of people.
Yeah.
And I mean, as a funny incident with Paul McCartney as well. One day we were interviewing Dionne Warwick, the singer, and she was talking about her hit records in the States and in this country. She said one of her great regrets is that Anyone Who Had a Heart wasn't a hit over here. Big hit for her in the States, not a hit over here. And she said, you know, because the Beatles nicked it and brought it back here for their friend, the girl who did the hats and coats at the Cavern, Cilla Black. And so she was rumbling on about that. And then the interview finished and got to a commercial break. The producer came in. He said, we've got Paul McCartney on the phone. He's just been watching that. He's really mad. So the next thing, I'm interviewing Paul McCartney on the phone. And I regard him as the biggest musical figure in my life. You know, I mean, it's a subjective thing, but I do. I think he's sensational. So to be interviewing Paul McCartney on the phone was absolutely brilliant. And at the end of it, I said, Paul, we've run out of time. I'm going to have to let it be. Which I thought was quite nice. And Ringo, we had Ringo in for a whole morning at TVAM, and he was well-oiled by 8:30 on the red wine with Rusty in the kitchen. Yeah, but he's a right old character. But those sort of stars, let's say Elton and Tom Jones, and just loads really, Sting. You could go on forever, really. At some stage or other, I've been lucky enough to interview
apart
them.
from Arnold Schwarzenegger, any difficult ones?
Well, there was a band called ZZ Sputnik. Do you remember them? They were vile. And they just didn't want to be there, didn't want to talk. They thought it was clever to be awkward. And there's actors, occasional actors, who don't deliberately make it difficult, but they just can't do it. They cannot somehow open up and be themselves. And female actresses as well, you know, you could see their necks going absolutely bright red. And the men, I remember there's one actor, a guy who's no longer with us now, he was Dr. Finlay. Bill Simpson, was that his name? He was absolutely dripping with sweat. Dripping with sweat. He was so anxious and nervous about being on live television. Yeah. So sometimes that is a bit hard going, I found over the years. But generally speaking, people have been great. And I'm just so thrilled to have interviewed some of the top comedians and top singers and musicians and politicians. It's a real privilege to get the chance to meet these people. And it was especially good, I found, when I was doing TVM in the 80s, having been a teenager in the 60s, and bought all these records of bands like the Animals and the Everleys. I mean, I interviewed the two Everly brothers together. That's a fantastic memory. Had all 5 Animals on the sofa, you know, Eric Burden and co. Suddenly, 20 years after I was buying all their records, I was on the sofa with these guys, meeting them. It was just such a thrill. Jerry and the Pacemakers, Billy J. Kramer. Absolutely. Yeah, wonderful.
I've got a number of questions here to go through. One took my fancy from Bob Millward. Bob, and Bob, over there.
Hi, Bob.
As a risk you take, being a celebrity, being known, is if you appear to have done something that goes right against the grain. Question from Bob: would you and Anne Diamond have jumped the queue in Westminster Hall?
I don't think so, no. but I still don't really feel I've got to the bottom of this story. Did they really jump the queue, or were they just filming there and it sort of... It just worked out that way.
They were apparently given journalist passes. They didn't actually join the queue.
Yeah.
They went on the side where the journalists were.
Which presumably a lot of journalists did.
Yes.
It's just because they're well known.
That was the point.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not a great fan particularly there's one way or the other. I mean, I've never met her, but I know Philip quite well over the years. Always really charming sort of guy. But I don't think they'll do something like that brazenly.
Were you
cynically? I don't think, but I just don't know enough about that story. But Anne might have done, but I wouldn't have jumped the queue. She's a bit more self-confident than me.
Were you as a celebrity,
Alleged.
alleged or not, were you very conscious of the fact that when you weren't on air, people were looking at you and that you had to behave in a certain way, as a family man, for instance? Was that ever a problem? Were you, wherever you went, were people asking you for your autograph and all that kind of thing? How did you cope with all that?
Yeah, it's never been a massive problem, but it has been just irritating at times when you're in the middle of a meal out. And, you know, literally the meal is there and you're halfway through it. And people come up and just won't stop talking to you. You don't want to be rude because it ends up in the papers, you know. So occasionally that has been difficult. But most of the time it's absolute delight to meet people. Now, of course, it's not autographs, it's selfies. That happens all the time. It used to be autographs. Now, very rarely. And I used to get loads of letters at work. I used to sign 100 or 200 photographs at the office each week, at the beginning of the week, so that the editor's secretary could send them out to people who wrote in for them. You don't get anything like that now. You get emails, or you sometimes get a letter in with a self-addressed envelope for you to send something back. But mostly it's all about emails and can we come by and get a selfie sometime and things like that. And very rarely is that annoying. It honestly isn't. I mean, it can be difficult if you've got children, especially when they're young and toddlers and they're running all over the place and someone is trying to take over in a conversation with you and you have to keep sort of trying to pull a child in. It can be awkward. There's never been a real problem, to be honest. And of course, I've never been absolutely massive, high profile like some that we know.
Like Mr. Tarrant, for instance.
Yeah.
The question Pam Moore is asking, and it's the classic: have you ever had anything go wrong when you've been on air? Where do you want to start?
Yeah, yeah, once, twice. I mean, the main one was back in the 80s at breakfast television, when it was a really busy morning because in the Soviet Union they were burying their president, Yuri Andropov. And at the same time, Elton John was getting married to a woman in Australia, Renata, in Sydney, if you may remember. We had pictures coming in from Moscow and from Australia. Moscow being about 3 or 4 hours ahead of us. They were well into the funeral of Yuri Andropov. And so we actually saw his body being taken through Red Square like that. I remember a caption came up saying "live from Moscow," which I thought was pretty unfortunate. And we're getting pictures direct in from Australia of Elton's wedding. At around about 8:15, I was desperate for a pee. This was one of my recurring problems and long programs, going for a pee. So I sprinted out during a commercial break, and I was out there and all that. But then it came back live before I got back in the studio, and Anne was chatting away. And the sound department hadn't noticed that I'd gone out. They hadn't turned my microphone off. So I shared a very private moment with millions of people. And people were phoning in saying, "What the hell was that noise when Anne was talking just now? It sounded like she was on the banks of the Zambezi." And that is a genuinely true story. And the other one, particularly, involves the bladder. In my early days at ATV, you might still have been there, I commentated on a football match for recording purposes at Aston Villa. They were playing Coventry City. Aston Villa, Coventry City, one February night, round about 1979. And it was my first ever commentary on television. And it was a bit of a nerve-wracking moment. The camera crew took me to the bar beforehand, you know, relaxed me a bit. Had about 3 or 4 pints of Carling or something. Then climbed the ladder to the gantry, high up in the stand, very rickety old thing, to get ready to commentate on the game. Ooh. The ladder gets pulled up and you're then stranded. By half-time I thought, I've got a bit of a problem here. I shouldn't have had those 4 pints. Later in the game, I was in agony. I had to stand up as opposed to sitting down with a hand down my trousers, trying to sort of control myself. It was a nightmare. Finally, the game finished, and I thought, oh, thank God, we put the ladder down, and I can get off to the gents. But no, we couldn't put the ladder down because the crowd hadn't moved, because they were waiting to hear the rest of the football results of that night over the tannoy, because that's what happened in those days, not so much these days, because people have got texting and things. So this huge gantry up there where we were, covered in litter and rubbish, the crew up there with me, sound people, lighting people, camera people, scoured the gantry, and I filled 13 polystyrene cups on my knees with a 35,000 crowd beneath me. It's absolutely true. So I learnt my lesson. But I found it a constant problem. I'm always wanting a piece, especially as I get older.
You know, in the prostate cancer support organisation, you're at home with somebody. You will, however, get to a stage where you have to wait before things happen, as opposed to having to sort of hold it in. We've been chatting for nearly an hour, and we could go on, and we haven't talked about you coming to Midlands today. Very quickly, how did that happen?
Well, I did Good Morning with Anne and Nick from Pebble Mill, national programme, which was a wonderful thing. I loved it. It started at 10 o'clock or 10:30, so we didn't have to be in quite so early. Still in at 6 o'clock, because you've got to do so much, homework about the people you're interviewing. But it was a lovely programme to do, and it's a television programme, a national television programme, with your own name on it. So it was really quite special to do that. And it was wonderful to be back with Anne again. We got 15 million people a week watching it, and it was a very, very happy time. Sadly and unbelievably and annoyingly, the man in charge of BBC One, Alan Yentob, decided that it was too similar to Rich and Judy's show on the other side, and so decided just to stop it and try other things. So that was devastating because, suddenly you're out of work. I had 4 kids by then, and it was very, very difficult. But anyway, after I'd done a few different bits and pieces for a year or so, I was approached by BBC Midlands Today to see if I'd like to have a go at presenting that. So I did 2 weeks as a sort of trial one summer when Michael Colley, who was then the incumbent presenter, was off. And they said, would you like to do it permanently? We could give you a 2-year contract. And I was keen to do it, because, I was out of work, and also I really enjoyed doing it. And I'm a big fan of the Midlands, and had been by then, and even more so now. And so I did a 2-year contract from 1997, and last week I reached 25 years, on October the 6th. 25 years, I can't believe it. Where's the time go? I mean, I was 50 when I started it, just hitting 50.
Really?
I'm still there. So I think I am now the oldest regional TV presenter in the country at 75 in a week's time or something, 2 weeks' time.
Your Oppo has recently retired.
Yeah, Bob, bless him.
Bob, I was going to ask him, because I was invited to his retirement party, and my question would have been, how on earth have you managed to stick it in that programme for so long? Because it must be, I couldn't have stood it. I have to say that eventually broadcasting became not satisfying enough. But you have done a sufficiently large number of different broadcasting elements in your life to have kept that interest. 25 years with Midlands Today.
Midlands Today, yeah, just last week.
So this question from Pam Moore is relevant. Have you ever had anything, not have you ever had anything go wrong? It's from Eric Scranage. Eric? Where's Eric? Down, right. Eric.
Hi, Eric.
This seems to be a sensible question on which to perhaps finish this little interview. Eric asks, why are you still working and not enjoying retirement?
Well, I am enjoying semi-retirement because I'm only part-time. So this week, for instance, I've had Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday off, but I'll be back in on Thursday, Friday, and next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I still enjoy doing it. I am a great believer in keeping active mentally and physically. Do an enormous amount of walking with my wife, Vicky, around Kinver Edge and so on. But also, I'm very keen to keep the old brain cells working. And Peter diversified massively, became a top businessman, managing director, high sheriff and all that stuff, didn't you? Am I right? I just enjoy broadcasting. I enjoy the writing of the scripts because I write most of the stuff I say. So it's a pretty full-on afternoon. I get in at lunchtime, full-on afternoon, then deliver it, and then I'm there again till a late bulletin at 10:30, leave the building at 11, which is a blooming long day, I tell you. And I'm absolutely knackered by 11. But I thoroughly enjoy the afternoon, A, writing the scripts, and B, planning for interviews and deciding what I'm going to ask people and then recording them or doing it live. Every day is different because stories are different every day. So it's still stimulating. And as you say, I've had a lot of variety, and I still do other things. I've done lots of cruises, giving talks on cruises and things like that, and other sort of little programs here and there, which keep me very stimulated. But I've got some great friends, have a fantastic social life, and I haven't got a BBC pension or anything like that because I've always been self-employed. So I need to keep working.
Yes. Okay,
very much so.
Don't mention pension funds in the last.
Oh, pension funds.
Would you like to pick that up, because I can't bend down?
No, I don't find it that easy. Oh my God!
That's to you from Brian Wilkes, and you might like to read out what he has said.
Oh my God! Is it a Norwich supporter? Brian, where are you?
There he is.
Hi. You support Norwich? You can get treatment, you know, for that. Yeah, well, I expect Norwich to win, but I want to remind you of that 2013, when Luton was still in the conference. We weren't in the Football League. We played Norwich away in the FA Cup, who were in the Premier League, and Luton won 1-0 with a goal by Scott Rendell with about 5 minutes to go. Do you remember that? And I'll tell you what, I was on one of my cruises giving talks, so I couldn't get to that game. It was really annoying to have a big FA Cup tie against a Premier League side when we were a conference team. But amazingly, Sky Sports and 5 Live got hold of me on a ship in the Caribbean. I did live interviews from the balcony of my ship. And Vicky, my wife, was sitting in the cabin watching the interview, because you could get Sky Sports on the ship. She was watching my interview, and I was on the balcony. She was watching it. And when I went back into the cabin, having finished the interview, I said, well, I think that went all right. She said, shh, and it was still finishing. Because of the delays, because, you know, the message, the question from London to me was going up to a satellite, down to a maritime satellite, up to another satellite, down to the ship, and then back again. And the delay was monumental. So I went in and watched the last, felt like 30 seconds of my live interview. Isn't that bonkers? Absolutely bonkers. But yeah, I think Norwich will win tonight, because I noticed today their average wage is £45,000 a week per player. Our maximum is £7,000 a week. So it's a different planet, I tell you. And last season, we were in the same division as Fulham, who got promoted. Their striker, Mitrovic, is on £125,000 a week in the Championship. And that was more than our whole squad added together. It is, honestly, such an unlevel playing field. But I love Norwich as a club, fantastic club, and I've known some lovely people from there. What's the next one?
Tonight will be the third time I've had the pleasure of meeting you. And you may already be aware of a planned fourth meeting from Brian. I don't know whether you are aware. Finally, he says, most medical-based stories are sad in content, but our forthcoming meeting will be a happy media event, particularly for those here tonight. Has that got something to do with the robot?
What are you talking about then?
I've been in touch with a colleague of yours, Abigail Erden, who's on the production side.
Abigail? Yeah. So we're going to do a piece, are we, on the programme about it? Oh, that's fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that. I mean, I only take each day as it comes, because there are people working on programmes forthcoming all the time. Yeah, I'll see Abby on Thursday.
Thank you very much for all your support.
Thank you, bless you. Thank you very much.
Well, that sort of seems to be... Thank you. We've been chatting for an hour and 10 minutes. We could go on chatting because of the enormous... you stuck it out in television.
Yeah.
And I admire you and respect you for that. You've done a whole host of different types of broadcasting work. Have you got a favourite of all the work that you have done, national, regional, local? Is it still Nick and Anne that you remember?
Working with Anne was spectacularly great. Yeah, I absolutely adore Anne, as I said earlier, and we had some wonderful times together, and we're constantly in touch now. She's godmother to one of my kids and so on, and you know, we see each other occasionally. So yeah, that is a highlight overall. Being a pioneer of breakfast television historically is a highlight, and something I particularly treasure was at Midlands Today. I went back with my father to Dunkirk. He was evacuated from Dunkirk, and it was pretty grim when it happened, and he was only a young man, and obviously if he hadn't survived, I wouldn't be here, and so on, and my 4 children wouldn't be here, and my 3 grandchildren wouldn't be here, etc. You know, it's just amazing to think of what wouldn't have happened. When the 60th anniversary came along of Dunkirk, which was 2000, people at the office who happened to know about my father, who'd never talked about it till comparatively recently then, he suddenly broke down one Sunday lunch and came out with it, all the detail. I went back with him and filmed and went to key places. He drove lorries and took troops up to the front and things like that, and then had to bring them all back, and found the field where he had to dump his lorry and where the military police had to disable them and, you know, make them useless. You know, he said you could see the Germans in the distance, and the police just said, head for the smoke, that's where the beach is, and hope for the best, you know. And we're standing on the beach, you know, and the kids running around with ice creams and buckets and spades. And the last time he was on that beach, people were being obliterated all around him. It was amazing to do that film. I treasure that.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure to chat to you, especially in front of an audience of like-minded, as far as I'm concerned, people who've been on the same journey as I have. Nick, thank you very much.
Bless you, Peter. Thank you. And thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Well, I really enjoyed that. I don't know about the rest of you, but I thought that was amazing. And when you see Nick on the television tomorrow night or the next time, Thursday, just remember he's probably been working there for hours before, and what he does and what he's done over the years has been quite amazing. And I'm so glad you still enjoy it. So we enjoy you being local BBC man. It's wonderful. Thank you very, very much. I hope you've all enjoyed it. And if you want to have a chat with Nick or Peter afterwards, please do. We've got food in there. We're going to do the raffle first, so if everybody wants to just hang on a minute while we do that.